Laura Bennet wasn't the type to just vanish. She was predictable, reliable, the kind of person who texted you back immediately and never missed a family dinner. So on that Tuesday morning, when the 27-year-old graphic designer left her small apartment in Mesa, Arizona, everything seemed normal. She sent her sister a quick text, stopping by after work. "See you then," was a promise she would never keep. She never showed up. As the evening stretched into night, a knot of dread began to tighten in her family's stomachs. Her phone, which was usually glued to her hand, went straight to voicemail. By midnight, her car, a familiar blue sedan, was still missing from its usual spot in the apartment complex parking lot. Panic was setting in. Something was terribly wrong. What made the whole situation even more chilling was what her next-door neighbor reported. Just before Laura left the building that morning, he'd overheard a voice through the thin walls, shaky and filled with fear. The voice he was sure it was Laura's said, "I think that group is watching me again." What group? No one had any idea what she was talking about. Her family and friends drew a complete blank. It was a cryptic clue leading absolutely nowhere. By Wednesday, the puzzle pieces started to get stranger. Her co-workers at the design firm confirmed that Laura hadn't been herself for days. She was jumpy, constantly looking over her shoulder. She'd mentioned something that had unsettled her deeply: strange flyers appearing on her car's windshield. They weren't advertisements or political pamphlets. They were bizarre. Laura described them as being covered in symbols she didn't recognize, intricate circles intertwined with stark black ink crosses. And beneath the symbols, a phrase written in Latin. She'd tried to Google it, but found nothing that made sense. It felt like a message, a warning. But from whom and why? Her colleagues had dismissed it as a weird prank, maybe some local fringe group trying to recruit people. But Laura felt it was personal. She felt targeted. She'd even joked with a nervous laugh that maybe she'd stumbled into a movie plot. Now that joke felt horrifyingly real. Her anxiety wasn't just in her head, it was a premonition. By Thursday morning, the silence from Laura was absolute. No texts, no calls, no social media updates. It was as if she had been erased from existence. Her family's frantic calls and messages went unanswered, each one a desperate plea into the void. Her mother, her face etched with a fear no parent should ever know, finally walked into the Mesa police station. With trembling hands, she clutched a recent photograph of Laura, smiling, vibrant, full of life. She begged the officers on duty, her voice cracking with desperation, to treat this as more than just a missing person case. She was taken, she insisted. I know she was. Please. You have to believe me. This is an abduction. The police took the report seriously, but they had to follow procedure. They classified her as a missing person, possibly endangered. They started asking the standard questions. Did she have any enemies? Was she having problems with anyone? Was there a secret boyfriend? The family had no answers. Laura was a good person, a quiet person. She had a small circle of friends, loved her job, and was close with her family. This just didn't make any sense. But what the investigators, her family, and everyone searching for her didn't know was the horrifying truth. Laura wasn't just missing, she had been taken. Dragged from her car in a deserted parking lot, a hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her screams. She was now miles away from everything she knew, held captive in an isolated, dilapidated compound deep in the unforgiving Arizona desert. The sun beat down on the corrugated tin roofs, the only sound, the whistling wind, and the faint, unsettling hum of chanting. Her captors were not common criminals. They were a cult, a shadowy group that operated far from the eyes of society. They believed in strange rituals, in ancient prophecies, and in the power of sacrifice. And they were preparing for what they called the Thursday night offering. Tonight. And Laura Bennet, the quiet graphic designer from Mesa, was meant to be that offering. Inside a small, windowless room, Laura was conscious. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. She was tied to a chair, the rough ropes digging into her wrists. The air was thick with the smell of dust, sage, and something else. Something metallic and sickening. She could hear them outside, their voices rising and falling in a language she didn't understand. Though she recognized the Latin phrase from the flyers, it was all connected. The flyers, her feeling of being watched, the group, it was all real. She wasn't a character in a story. She was a victim in a nightmare. But amidst the overwhelming fear, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She was a fighter. She thought of her sister waiting for her mother's worried face. She had to get out. She had to survive. She began to test the ropes, subtly searching for any weakness, any give. Her mind raced, replaying every survival movie she'd ever seen, every article she'd ever read. Is there anything at all she could use? Back in Mesa, the police investigation was slowly gaining traction. Laura's car had just been found abandoned in a dusty lot on the outskirts of town, miles from her workplace or apartment. The doors were unlocked, her purse and phone gone. But on the driver's seat, left behind as if for them to find, was one of those strange flyers. A circle, a black cross, and the Latin phrase. An officer who had studied ancient history recognized the symbols. They weren't just random doodles. They were associated with a long-forgotten, extremist splinter group, a doomsday cult, thought to have died out decades ago. A group known for its belief in ritualistic purification through sacrifice. Suddenly, Laura's mother's pleas echoed in the detective's mind. Abduction. Offering. The pieces were slotting together into a picture of unimaginable horror. The team launched into a frenzy of activity. They pulled up old case files, searched for any known associates of the historical cult, and began cross-referencing satellite maps of the desert for any signs of isolated settlements. They were no longer looking for a missing person. They were in a race against time to stop a ritual murder. As the sun began its descent, casting long, ominous shadows across the desert, Laura felt a change in the atmosphere. The chanting outside grew louder, more feverish. The door to her room creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, holding a ceremonial dagger that glinted in the dim light. Their eyes were devoid of empathy, filled only with a terrifying, zealous fire. It was time, but Laura was ready. In the last hour, she had managed to work one hand partially free from the ropes. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. She knew she would only get one chance. As the figure stepped into the room, she held her breath, her body coiled like a spring, every instinct screaming at her to fight. To live. Outside, the faint but growing sound of a helicopter's rotors began to slice through the desert air. The police were coming, but would they be in time? The cult's Thursday night offering was about to begin, and in that desolate compound, under the vast, indifferent Arizona sky, Laura Bennett's life hung precariously in the balance. Time was running out. Laura regained consciousness slowly, like rising up through deep, dark water. Her head throbbed, her mouth was as dry as sandpaper, and the first thing she felt was the heat. This wasn't the normal, familiar Arizona heat she was used to. It was a dry, suffocating stillness that whispered to her, telling her she was miles away from any city, any civilization. As her vision finally cleared, she realized she was lying on a thin, coarse mat inside a stone room that looked like it had been carved directly into the earth. The walls were rough and uneven. A single lantern hung from a rusty hook, and there were no windows at all, just one heavy wooden door, reinforced with thick metal bands. The air was heavy with the faint, sweet smell of smoke and burning sage. Then she heard it, a low, rhythmic hum. It was the sound of several voices chanting in perfect unison, their tones rising and falling in a pattern that spoke of a ritual practiced for countless years. The sound echoed through what she imagined were long, winding corridors. Laura pushed herself up, a wave of pure panic making her hands shake uncontrollably. She looked down at her wrists. They were tied. Not painfully, but tight enough to send a clear message. Whoever had brought her here meant business. They didn't want to break her. They wanted to control her. She forced herself to take a slow, deep breath. Think, Laura, think. Don't panic. Look around. Her eyes darted across the room, landing on strange markings painted all over the stone walls. There were circles with intersecting lines, triangles within triangles, and other symbols she had never seen before. Some were old and faded, ghosts of a distant past, but others looked fresh, as if they had been painted just hours ago. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she instinctively scrambled into the corner of the room, trying to make herself as small as possible. The footsteps grew louder, then passed right by her door, continuing down the hall. She saw a flicker of movement through the crack under the door. the soft rustling sound of robes, and a quick glimpse of sand-covered boots disappearing into the darkness. She whispered to herself, her voice barely a tremble, "Where am I?" Meanwhile, miles and miles away from the suffocating heat of that stone room, detectives were hunched over a brightly lit screen, reviewing Laura's last known digital activity. They found nothing unusual. No strange purchases on her credit card, no cryptic messages in her emails or texts. The only thing they had was her final, seemingly innocent message. "I'll stop by after work." And after that, complete radio silence. The cell phone tower data painted a grim picture. Her device had moved steadily out into the vast, empty desert, and then, suddenly it dropped offline. It just vanished. 2 deputies were now driving the dusty perimeter roads, their eyes scanning the ground for any sign of tire tracks, any clue that might lead them to her. One of them spoke into his radio, his voice low and somber. "People don't just disappear out here, unless someone wants them gone." Back inside the mysterious compound, Laura was examining every single detail of her prison cell again. Her gaze traveled up the wall and stopped. A vent. It was small, rectangular, and set high up on the wall, almost touching the ceiling. Rust coated its edges, but it looked maybe just wide enough. With renewed hope, she dragged the thin mat directly under it. She climbed onto it, her bare feet struggling for purchase. Standing on her toes, she stretched her bound hands upward, her fingers just brushing against the cool metal of the vent cover. It was warm to the touch, still holding the heat from the relentless desert sun. And then, the chanting outside intensified. The low hum erupted into a chorus of voices shouting a final powerful phrase together. The sound vibrated through the stone, through the floor, and into Laura's very bones. Her pulse spiked, hammering against her ribs. In the sudden silence that followed, a man's voice boomed from somewhere down the hallway. "Prepare her. Midnight is close." Laura froze, her hand still touching the vent. A chilling realization washed over her. Whatever they were planning, whatever ritual she was a part of, it was happening tonight, it was happening soon. She had only a few precious hours to find a way out of this nightmare. The clock was ticking, and her fight for survival had just begun. Laura waited until the footsteps faded. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure someone outside could hear it, but she forced herself to breathe, slow and steady. If she panicked, she was dead. If she stayed, she was dead. If she moved, she might live. She stood on the mat again, palms sweating, stretching her fingers toward the vent. This time she grabbed the metal grate with both hands and pulled. It groaned, softly old screws scraping against the stone. She froze. Listened, no footsteps. She pulled again with all her strength. The grate popped loose with a sharp metallic snap, nearly slipping from her hands. She held it tight, her knuckles white. Climbing back onto the mat, she pushed herself into the dark square opening. A wave of hot air hit her face. The tunnel smelled like rust and dry sand. It was so narrow that her shoulders brushed both sides as she started to crawl. Every small movement echoed lightly through the metal, a tiny drumbeat of her escape. Behind her, the rhythmic chanting that had been the soundtrack to her terror suddenly stopped as if someone had given a silent signal to end the ritual. Laura swallowed hard, the silence now even more frightening than the noise. She had to keep going. The tunnel split into 2 passages, left or right. It was a choice that could mean life or death. She paused, straining to hear anything. From the right, she felt faint vibrations, a low hum like distant machinery. From the left, nothing but the whisper of desert wind. She chose left. The unknown seemed safer than the known. The metal grew hotter the further she crawled. Sweat dripped from her forehead, stinging her eyes. Her own breath echoed back at her in short, ragged bursts. The complete silence was disorienting, making her feel dizzy, as if the entire world outside this suffocating metal tube didn't exist. It was just her, the darkness, and the burning heat. Then a sound. Boots. Dozens of them. Running on the stone floor below, her blood ran cold. A voice muffled but clear echoed faintly beneath her. "She's out. Search the vents, now." Panic surged through her. Laura pushed herself faster, ignoring the pain as she scraped her knees, her elbows, her shins on the rough metal. The tunnel began to slope upward, and ahead, she saw a small square of daylight. a service exit. She reached the end, her body screaming in protest. She kicked hard at the rusted panel. It resisted. She kicked again, adrenaline giving her a final burst of strength. The panel flew outward, and she was blinded by the intense desert sun. She crawled out onto rough, hot rock, sucking in a full, desperate breath of fresh desert air. She was free, but the freedom lasted only seconds. Two robed figures were already rounding the corner of the outer structure, their dark forms silhouetted against the bright sky. They blocked the path toward the open desert. One of them raised a hand, his voice eerily calm. "Laura, don't make this harder." She backed away, her bare feet slipping in the loose sand. The heat shimmered around them, distorting the air. Her throat tightened, dry and raw. The second figure took a step closer. "You were chosen. Return, and the ritual will be peaceful." Chosen for what? She wasn't going to find out. Laura's eyes darted around, searching for a weapon, for anything. She spotted a jagged piece of metal lying near the ventrusty, palm-sized with a sharp edge. She grabbed it. She held it out, her arm trembling, but her resolve firm. "Stay back," she warned, her voice cracking but fierce. The two cult members stopped, exchanging a quick glance. The one on the left whispered, his voice carrying on the wind, "The desert will not save you. No one comes here." Laura didn't answer. She ran. Her legs burned with the effort, unused to this kind of exertion. Sand filled her shoes, grating against her raw feet. Her breath tore through her lungs. Behind her cheered the cultists sprinting after Hertha. Sound of their robes whipping against the wind was a terrifying reminder of how close they were. Suddenly, the compound's alarm bell began to ring, a deep, bone-chilling clang that echoed across the vast, empty dunes, announcing her escape to everyone. Miles away, in a cool, dark room, a sheriff's drone was making a routine sweep of the area. The operator leaned closer to his screen. "Sir, we've got movement," he said, his voice calm and professional. A faint heat signature, a tiny flicker of life, had just appeared on the monitor, exactly where it shouldn't be. Back in the desert, Laura stumbled down a sand dune, nearly falling. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving to put as much distance as possible between herself and that place. A voice shouted behind her, carried by the wind. "Bring her back. Don't let her reach the ridge." Laura looked up, her eyes scanning the horizon. A rocky ridge cut across the skyline, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. If she could reach it, she might be able to hide, or signal someone, or climb. It was a chance, and it was all she had. She pushed harder, her heart screaming in her chest, a frantic drumbeat of terror and hope. The cult was getting closer. She could hear their footsteps pounding on the sand. The ridge was still so far away. The sun was beginning to set, stretching long, menacing shadows across the desert floor. Shadows that made everything feel even more dangerous, hiding unknown threats. She didn't know it yet, but help was finally on its way. Just not fast enough. The desert sun was a furnace, baking the rocks until they scorched her skin. Laura scrambled up the ridge, her palms shredded and raw. Every muscle screamed, every breath was a mouthful of dust. Behind her, their voices echoed through the canyon, a twisted chorus calling her name. They were getting closer. She found a boulder and slid behind it, pressing her body flat against the hot stone, trying to make herself invisible. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the desert's silence. She held her breath, listening. Crunch. Gravel shifting below her, not running, but searching. Methodical. One of them called out, his voice unnervingly calm. "Laura, you can't go far. The desert decides who survives out here. Come back and we end this before midnight." It wasn't a plea, it was a promise. A threat veiled in false concern. Then another voice, colder, sharper, cut through the air. "If she escapes, the offering fails. Find her." The word offering sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. She didn't know what it meant, but the primal fear it ignited was all the explanation she needed. She couldn't go back. She peeked around the edge of the rock, three of them fanning out, their dark robes stark against the red-gold landscape. One carried a lantern, its flame weak in the fading daylight, a grim omen of the darkness to come. He was ready to search the deep places. Her eyes scanned the horizon, desperate for anything. A flash of metal, half buried in the sand. Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through her panic. She crawled towards it, scraping her knees, keeping her head low. It was a piece of a broken mining rail, rusted but solid, sign a path. Old mines meant old tunnels, forgotten passages they might not know about. She followed the rail as it curved into the deep shadow of the ridge. The air grew cooler here, the wind whispering secrets against her skin. Then she heard it, a low, distant hum. Something mechanical, something alive in the dead rock. And there it was. A collapsed mine entrance, a dark wound in the mountainside, mostly blocked by a rock slide, but with a gap just wide enough. Without a second thought, she squeezed through. The darkness was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all light and sound. It smelled of old earth, rust, and something else. Something ancient and undisturbed. She moved forward blindly, her hands tracing the damp, rough-hewn walls, feeling her way deeper into the mountain's core. She heard them arrive at the ridge above, the crunch of boots, the murmur of frustrated voices. She went this way. Check for openings. Their sounds were muffled, but the threat was as clear as if they were standing right beside her. She pushed herself faster, deeper into the suffocating black. The tunnel felt alive, its oppressive silence pressing in, but it was also her shield. Then her fingers brushed against something smooth and warm. A cable, thick rubber-coated, a power line. Her mind reeled. They were running electricity down here. This wasn't just some primitive cult living off the grid. They had infrastructure. Something was happening underground. Ahead, a faint, flickering light beckoned from the depths, orange and unsteady like firelight. She crept toward it, her back pressed against the tunnel wall. Each step a careful, calculated risk. The hum grew louder. She reached the end of the tunnel and peered around the corner. The sight stole the breath from her lungs. A massive chamber, carved from the living rock, was lit by dozens of candles. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes, supplies, dried foods. In the center of the floor, the candles formed a perfect circle around a huge stone slab. Its surface covered in the same swirling, nightmarish symbols she'd seen painted on the wall of her cell. This wasn't a storeroom, it was a ritual chamber, an altar. Her gaze swept across the room and landed on a wooden table pushed against the far wall. It was covered in papers, maps, names, and photos. She crept closer, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. Her blood ran cold. They were photos of women, missing women. News clippings of disappearances from Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, all over the Southwest. One photo, set apart from the others, was circled in red ink. It was her. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't random. They had chosen her. She scanned the rest of the document's hand-drawn astrological charts. Photocopies of ancient brittle texts, notes scribbled in a frantic hand. One phrase appeared over and over, underlined, circled, almost burned into the paper. Thursday's offering, midnight, tonight, a thud from above. Footsteps on the ridge, directly over her head. They were close, so close. She felt trapped, buried alive. But as despair threatened to swallow her, she imagined something else. Far across the desert, a different sound. The roar of engines. The image of a sheriff's convoy, kicking up dust as it raced towards Hollow Ridge. Help was coming. They were coming for a simple kidnapping, but they were about to walk into the heart of something far older and more monstrous. She had to get out. She backed away from the chamber, eyes darting down the connecting tunnels, searching for another escape route. Any way out? And then a voice whispered from the darkness right behind her. "Laura, you shouldn't be here." She spun around, her heart stopping. One of the leaders stood there, his face half hidden in the glow of his lantern. His expression wasn't angry or triumphant. It was disappointed. Like a teacher scolding a student who had failed a simple test. "You were meant to accept your role," he said, his voice soft, almost soothing. "You were chosen weeks ago." "You're sick," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. He took a step closer, lowering the lantern. The flame danced, casting long, distorted shadows across his face. "No, we are devoted. You were the final sign, the one we've been waiting for." He raised his free hand, but not to strike her. It was a signal. From the darkness behind him, more footsteps echoed, filling the tunnel, or coming from all sides. She was cornered. Nowhere left to run, at high above on the surface. The lead sheriff's vehicle crunched to a halt at the edge of the silent, deserted compound. The rescue had arrived. The final pieces were in place. In the darkness below, in the twilight above, everything was about to collide. The desert sun beat down, turning the rocks into a scorching griddle. Laura's palms were raw, stinging with every desperate handhold as she clawed her way up the ridge. Breath she took was thick with dust, coating her throat, making her gasp. Behind her, the shouts echoed, bouncing off the canyon walls, getting closer. The cult, her pursuers. The sun dipped lower, painting the landscape in shades of gold and blood red, a beautiful, terrifying furnace. She found a boulder, a temporary shield, and slid behind it, pressing herself flat against the warm stone. She tried to quiet her frantic breathing, straining to hear over the pounding in her own ears. Bootsteps crunched on the gravel below her position. Not running anymore. They were searching. 3 of them, she counted. A voice, unnervingly gentle, called out her name. Laura. The desert decides who survives out here. Come back, and we end this before midnight. His tone sent a shiver down her spine, a calm that was more menacing than any threat. Then another voice, colder and sharper, cut through the air. If she escapes, the offering fails. Find her. The word offering hung in the dry heat. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but every fiber of her being screamed that she couldn't let them take her back to that compound. She couldn't be their offering. Laura risked a peek around the edge of the rock. The men were spreading out, their figures dark against the setting sun. They moved with a practiced efficiency, checking every shadow, every gap between the rocks. One of them carried a lantern, its glass glinting even though daylight still lingered. It was a strange detail, suggesting they expected their search to lead them into dark places. He was prepared to follow her anywhere. Just as despair began to creep in, something caught her eye. Glint of metal, half buried in the sand a short distance away. Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through her fear. Keeping low, she crawled toward it, the grit and pebbles digging into her already torn skin. When she reached it, her heart gave a painful lurch. It was a piece of a broken mining rail, rusted and forgotten. But it wasn't just junk. It was a sign, a path. Old mining equipment meant old mining tunnels the cult might not know about, or might have abandoned. She began to follow the rusted rail, which led her deeper into the growing shadow of the ridge. The air grew cooler here, a small mercy. The wind shifted, carrying a faint, distant hum. It was a low, mechanical sound, almost too subtle to notice, but it was there. And then she saw it. A collapsed mine entrance, almost completely hidden by a rock slide. But there was a gap, a narrow, dark slit, just big enough for a desperate person to squeeze through. She didn't hesitate. Sucking in a breath, she slid into the opening. The darkness was absolute, swallowing her whole. The air inside was cool and damp, smelling of rust and ancient, undisturbed earth. It was a stark contrast to the burning heat outside. She moved slowly, using her hands to feel her way along the rough-hewn tunnel walls, terrified of tripping over unseen obstacles. Outside, she heard the cult members reach the ridge right above her. Their footsteps crunched overhead. She heard their muffled voices, their whispers carrying down into her hiding place. Then, one of them shouted, his voice sharp with discovery. She went this way. Check for openings. Panic seized her, but she forced it down, pushing herself deeper into the suffocating blackness. The tunnel felt alive, its darkness a physical presence pressing in on her, but it was also her salvation. It hit her. She took shallow, silent breaths, her fingers tracing the cold, damp rock. Then, her hand brushed against something unexpected. A cable. It was thick and strangely warm. A power cable, modern and out of place in this forgotten mine. Her eyes widened in the dark. The cult wasn't just using torches and lanterns, or powering something down here, something significant. A flicker of light appeared far ahead in the tunnel. It was orange and unsteady, like firelight. She crept toward it, her back pressed against the wall, her every movement a careful, deliberate act. She got closer. The tunnel opened into a hidden chamber, carved directly into the rock. And what she saw made her blood run cold. The chamber was filled with wooden shelves stacked high with boxes of supplies, food, water, medical kits. But the floor was the heart of it. Dozens of candles were arranged in a large circular pattern. And in the very center of that circle lay a massive stone slab, its surface covered in the same strange, unsettling symbols she had seen etched into the walls of her room back at the compound. This wasn't just a storage room, it was a ritual chamber, a place of sacrifice. Laura's breath hitched. The cult hadn't just kidnapped her and locked her in a room. It built an entire hidden infrastructure beneath the desert, a secret world shielded from any prying eyes, from any search planes or satellites. Her gaze fell upon a wooden table in the corner, cluttered with papers. Drawn by a terrible curiosity, she moved closer. Maps of the surrounding area, lists of names, and photos. The photos showed the faces of women. Young women, smiling in what looked like graduation photos, vacation snapshots, driver's license pictures. Underneath them were clippings missing persons reports from across the Southwest. Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. And then she saw it. One photo, circled in red ink, it was her own. Her stomach twisted into a knot of pure terror. She scanned the table again, her eyes darting over the scattered documents. There were hand-drawn symbols, photocopies of what looked like ancient texts and scrawled notes. In one phrase, repeated over and over, underlined, circled, written in thick, black ink, Thursday's offering, midnight, tonight. Her pulse was a frantic drum against her ribs, so violent she thought she might pass out. Suddenly, a heavy thud from above, footsteps on the ridge directly over the chamber. The cult was close, too close. They were closing in. But at that same moment, miles away, a different kind of hope was speeding across the desert. A convoy of sheriff's vehicles, their lights flashing silently in the twilight, kicking up massive clouds of dust as they raced toward Hollow Ridge. A rescue was coming, but they had no idea what they were driving into. They thought it was a simple kidnapping. They didn't know they were about to confront a hidden, underground world built for a dark purpose. Laura backed away from the ritual chamber, her mind racing. She had to find another way out, another tunnel, a side path, anything. She spun around, ready to plunge back into the darkness. And that's when she saw him. From the blackness of the tunnel she'd just come from, a voice whispered her name. "Laura, you shouldn't be here." She froze. One of the cult leaders stood in the tunnel's entrance, his face half hidden in the shadows cast by the lantern in his hand. His expression wasn't angry. It was something far more disturbing. It was disappointment. "You were meant to accept your role," he said, his voice soft, almost paternal. "You were chosen weeks ago." "You're sick," she choked out, backing away. He stepped toward her into the candlelight of the chamber, lowering his lantern so the flame danced across his eerily calm eyes. "No," he corrected gently. "We are devoted. You are the final sign." He raised his free hand, but not to strike her. It was a signal. From the darkness behind him, echoing footsteps filled the tunnel. They were coming. She was trapped. There was nowhere left to run. And above ground, under the last light of day, the sheriff's team finally reached the edge of the compound. The two worlds, one of law and order, the other of dark devotion, were about to collide. Everything was about to break. The moment Laura stepped out of the mine, the desert night hit her like a wave, the sudden coolness of the air. The sharp scent of dust, the blinding slice of headlights cutting through the darkness. Dozens of deputies swarmed the compound, their movements sharp and urgent as they secured suspects, cleared structures, and shouted orders into their radios. Red and blue lights pulsed across the old stone walls, painting the chaotic scene in flashes of color. A paramedic rushed toward her. "Ma'am, sit down, we need to check your vitals," but Laura couldn't sit. Her legs felt like they'd forgotten how to stop moving. Every cell in her body still locked in survival mode. Deputy Collins, the one who'd first reached her in the darkness below, stayed close. His eyes constantly scanned the shadows, as if expecting something to leap out at any moment. "You're safe," he kept repeating, almost as if he needed to convince himself just as much as he needed to convince her. Behind them, officers escorted the cult members in handcuffs. Some were crying, some were chanting softly under their breath, while others just stared ahead with blank, unsettling expressions. The leader was among them, walking calmly with dust stained on his dark robe, his face an unreadable mask. As he passed Laura, he paused just long enough for their eyes to meet. "You survived the hour," he murmured, his voice a low whisper. "Perhaps the desert chose differently than we expected." Before Laura could even process his words, deputies shoved him forward, breaking the strange moment. A chill crawled up her spine. She turned away, but the glow of the torchlight still flickered in her mind. The chanting, the strange symbols on the walls, the suffocating atmosphere of the underground chamber. None of it felt real, and it certainly wasn't something she could explain in a simple statement to the police. Sheriff Dalton approached her then, his hat tucked respectfully under his arm. "We're going to take you home, Laura," he said gently. "Your family is waiting at the station. They never stop pushing us to keep searching." Her throat tightened at his words. Home, family, normalcy. Concepts that suddenly felt alien, like they belonged to a different life, a different person. As deputies helped her into the back of a large SUV, she looked out across the sprawling desert. It was vast, silent, and endless under the night sky. The torches from the compound had been extinguished. The strange gathering was being dismantled. Officers were already marking evidence and photographing the cryptic symbols painted on the rocks. But something still lingered in the air. A tension. Silence that felt far too deep for a simple kidnapping case. The drive back to town felt like drifting through a dream. The lights of the patrol cars blurred into long streaks. The constant buzz of the radios faded into a low hum. The world outside her window was just a dark ocean of sand and rock, stretching on forever. When they finally arrived at the sheriff's station, Laura stepped out of the vehicle and into the bright lights of the parking lot. In an instant, her mother was there, running toward her, tears streaming down her face. Laura collapsed into her arms, the strength she'd held onto for so long finally giving way. "I thought," her mother sobbed, holding her so tightly Laura could barely breathe. "I thought you were gone." Laura just shook her head, clinging to her, unable to form words. Kept thinking, if I could just stay alive until someone found me, you would. They stood like that for a long time. Two figures, silhouetted by the flashing police lights, a mother and daughter finding their way back to each other. Later, in a warm interview room, deputies brought Laura water, blankets, and most importantly, space to breathe. As she slowly sipped the water, the feeling returning to her numb fingers, she began to talk. She told them everything. Every symbol she saw etched into the stone, every dark tunnel she was led through, every hushed voice, every chilling word the leader had whispered. She recounted the hour of terror, the belief that it was her last. When she finally finished, the room was silent. Sheriff Dalton exhaled slowly and closed his notebook. He looked at her not with pity, but with a deep, profound respect. "You were unbelievably strong, Laura," he said. "And you helped us uncover something big here. You won't hurt anyone else ever again." Laura nodded, a sense of finality settling over her, but her gaze drifted to the window, out toward the dark line of the desert on the horizon. It was over, but it wasn't gone. In the weeks that followed, the story made headlines across Arizona. The remote desert compound was cleared, the strange equipment removed, and the cult members were taken into custody or identified. Prosecutors began building case after case against them, uncovering a network far larger than anyone had initially suspected. The media called Laura a miracle, a survivor, testament to the power of not giving up. But Laura refused the interviews. She avoided the reporters who camped outside her house. She stayed inside most days, healing slowly, quietly, piecing herself back together in the safety of her home. One evening, weeks later, she finally stepped outside and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. She whispered to herself, the words carried away by the gentle breeze, "I'm here."
I made it back.
Her life didn't simply return to what it was before. How could it? But it moved forward, one day at a time. And though she never set foot in that part of the desert again, she carried one powerful truth with her. Being missing isn't the same as being gone. Sometimes survival is just the stubborn refusal to give in, even when the world itself seems determined to make you disappear. Laura Bennet lived, and her story became a quiet, powerful reminder across the state of Arizona. Never stop searching, never give up hope. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more true stories of survival and resilience.